Hello, everyone.
Hello.
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 Hello. Hello.
Miss Anthony, you're muted, so we couldn't hear you talk. Just a minute, folks. It looks like Miss Anthony's having an audio problem.
Go, can you hear me now, Bruce? Bruce, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. There's a bit of
Okay.
an echo, but we can hear you.
Okay. Just 1 minute. Okay. Good afternoon. I want to welcome all participants to our open conversation on racism. All participants have received an invitation that included an application with all of the information necessary to participate tonight. All those living outside the city limit or do not have the equipment can listen by phone. That information was sent out on our city website, and I will give it to you again. The webinar is 811-172, passcode 0825. The open conversation on racism committee consists of Councilwoman Angela James, Councilman Freddie Gordon, and myself as chair. We're having this open conversation on racism due to the massive number of protests going on all over the country in support of racial justice. Racial divisiveness manifests itself around the nation and sometimes in not so subtle ways. This evening, we have with us Dr. Samuel James. And Dr. Samuel James has a very impressive resume, and I'm going to share that with you. Dr. Samuel James Samuels is co-founder and president of Insight. He's a highly valued lecturer, presenter, keynote speaker, and consultant. He has contributed to the study of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness throughout his writings, teachings, and published contributions. He has been cited in such renowned publications as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Charlotte Observer, Washington Minorities in Business Insiders, the National Public Radio Marketplace, and the United States Department of Justice Weed and Seed for his successful and innovative race relations. He is the author of Roots of Racism, Vantage Press 2001. He has also consulted with 2 presidents, and he has addressed the U.S. House of Representatives on racial issues and diversity. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. James Samuels. Before he speaks, we'll be on mute while he speaks, and then we will go into the discussion and Q&A. Dr. Samuels. Are you on, Dr. Samuels?
Yes, I'm right here. I'm asking, is my video turned off by the host, or is there something else going on?
We didn't turn the videos off.
I don't know why my video is not on. It's showing that it should be on. Not sure what that is. You can hear my voice, however, though, right?
We can hear you, but we'd like to see you too.
I would like to be seen. Does anyone have a suggestion? Do I need to sign off and sign back on?
Maybe
Bruce.
that's what I have to do.
Let me try that. I'm going to sign off and then I'm going to sign back on, okay?
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, great.
There we go. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Allow me to begin with these remarks. It was the famed German novelist and diplomat, Johann Goethe, who said, and I quote, "To act is easy, but to think is hard." Tonight, we come to engage each other in doing a little bit of both. Let us begin first by a bit of thinking. The city of Monroe and Union County is the beloved home of many residents whose concerns will be represented here tonight in these remarks. Yet they're more than mere residents, because for many, their ancestral bloodlines and family lineage extend well beyond the incorporation of the county and the city in 1842 and 1844, respectively. We look upon Monroe and Union County as a good place to live, a good place to raise our families, because we're blessed with the best neighbors and brightest citizens found anywhere. The chief aim of our appeal tonight is to initiate meaningful conversation focused on ensuring that Monroe and Union County become fully recognized locally, regionally, and nationally as a model community, as a place where all persons of every race, gender, color, creed, ethnicity, and sexual orientation can come and feel welcomed and valued as a vital part of this diverse and inclusive community. When the forefathers founded this community, they chose the name Union. And it is almost a certainty that they were not giving homage to the Union Army. Neither were they acknowledging the Northern sentiments which opposed every aspect of the Southern way of life. In choosing the name Union, they most definitely were inspired by something more prophetic than even they themselves could have known at the time. For today, we are able to see the historical irony of a racially divided community having chosen such a name as Union County. What was being said is that when we take a brief look back into our past, we then are encouraged to take a deeper look into the present and a visionary glance toward what could be a possible future. Let us first think about the past. Past events are called history, but the word history itself has a fundamental flaw in the fact that history is more than a his story. History is more than the story of one person or one people. History is the story of our people, everyone's people. And the history of Monroe Union County is both glorious and vainglorious. It is glorious in the fact that hardworking, salt of the earth people came to this region and settled in the wilderness and transformed the wilds into what we see today. But the other less glamorous and vainglorious side of our history is the reality of human enslavement and racial dehumanization. We may become disquieted, however, by the mere mention of such brutal bygones, unless we are reminded that the greatest force of history is something that we carry within us. And that hidden force that we carry within us from history influences and controls our conscious and unconscious actions. The history of the past is always alive. It is never dead. And we keep it alive by the things we say, the things we do, and the way that we act. The greatest force of history, however, is commonly called heritage. We can never relive history, but we relive our heritage each and every day. This diverse community, which we call home, has a history and a heritage written in the ink whose tincture was mixed with the shed blood, the salt-soaked tears, and the briny sweat of both European settlers and their African subjects. It is the remembrance and the respects of both sides of that experience and their combined totals, which holds our history and our heritage together in an inextricable bound, which, when told together, create the full story of America's history. History has two sides. Winthrop Jordan mentioned it in his book, White Over Black. One half of that story is black, the other is white. One half of that story is bound, the other is free. One half of that story speaks of perseverance, and the other side speaks of persistence. When we put those two histories together, we come away with our story. And it is a wonderful story because we, in a sense, share the same story, even though we share this different experience and we take from it a different heritage. But where we unite is on the historical principle of who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, and in this case, who we are as a community. Anyone who's not sure of that, should we hear these words all over again? We, the people, hold these truths to be self-evident that all persons were created equal and endowed by their creator with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have allowed, however, somehow the shared pains of history's past and our common pride in our particular heritage to segregate us and to group us according to which end of the whip our ancestors were on. But let us not digress into the past to the point of opening up old wounds or hashing out history's wrongs. For we are now removed from the practice of slavery in America by the safe historical distance of 6 generations. And any of us who have feelings about the fact of history, I remind you, no one alive today ever participated in slavery. No one alive today has slaves. And none of us who are alive today are slaves. Yet, 154 years later, while we do not have slaves and we're not slaves, all of us are still enslaved by the systemic inequities and systematic injustices that we have inherited from a legacy of slavery. The dehumanizing shadow of slavery continues to cast the sinful shroud of its lethal and lingering presence upon all of us, as it has every generation that preceded us. We have inherited this legacy in the form of racism from our ancestors and our parents. And just like them, we are passing that same hateful legacy of racism on to our children. There is a bromide which I would share with us, which says, and I quote, "Our children may not always listen to what we say, but you can be assured they will always repeat what we do." With regards to inheriting and bequeathing sins, remember, we are not responsible for what previous generations did, but we are responsible for what we do in our own time and in our own generation. We need not look any further than the year 1910, when certain citizens of Union County, Monroe, thought it worship worthy to commission and erect a statue in the public domain to commemorate those who fought a war for the right to hold persons of African descent in a state of perpetual slavery. These memorials, which are in our community and all over our state and our nation, these memorials honor those who rebelled against the nation itself in order to ensure that they would continue to have the legal rights which were enjoyed for 246 years. They wanted to continue to have the right to allow white men to buy, to own, and to sell Black people as their private livestock. Many chose death rather than accept slavery. And there are many today who are still insisting on keeping the sentiments of slavery alive. America has produced many great accomplishments in its brief history, but human slavery is not and will never be one of our greatest legacies. Hosea 8:7 says, "They who sow to the wind shall reap the whirlwind." The meaning of this enigmatic verse says that the foolishness that we commit in the past will always produce unwanted pains and consequences in the future. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, "He who forgets the past will lose one eye, but anyone who dwells too long on the past, they will lose both eyes." So lest we become blinded by the past, let us think for a moment about the present. Monroe Union County presently is positioned between two of the most visited sites in all of the Carolinas. We are located between Charlotte, the biggest city, and the Carolina coast, the world's best beaches. We are strategically located to be a much more important place than a pass-through town along the way between points elsewhere. Monroe and Union County is geographically positioned and economically poised to become a progressive destination city in and of its own right. But nothing will happen without action, just as history does not happen without precedent. Therefore, the future of our city and county will depend squarely upon what we do or what we fail to do in the next ensuing days. There is a saying that the ancient Greeks coined, which says, "Nothing but Athena has ever sprang from the head of Zeus full grown." Likewise, racism did not suddenly appear out of nowhere full grown. Racism has roots. The roots of racism are interwoven into the woof and warp of every thread of the fabric, foundation, and the framework of American life. And Monroe Union County is no different. The racial barriers present and operative in our city and county and others, if not removed by good intended people like you and I today, will continue to hinder the economic growth and social prosperity of all of our citizens for generations to come. Racism is dangerous because it was uniquely designed to hinder the progress and the success of targeted individuals and specific communities. When people of color were permitted to settle in this nation and in this area, they were not expected to excel. They were uniquely expected and positioned to accept the mediocrity And that mediocrity that we see imposed upon minority communities 150 years ago since slavery has in fact become evident in the racial, the economic, and the social disparities among people in every community. Sadly, this same forced contentment with mediocrity has become socially ingrained in much of the economic disparity we see today. For Monroe and Union County, there's a call to rise up and allow this community to reach its fullest potential. Unite, come together, and undo the effects of generational poverty that centuries of overt and covert racism has had on this beloved community. What is racism? Racism is best defined as prejudice, discrimination, and hatred toward other human beings based on the belief that one race is naturally superior to another race. Both implicit racism and unconscious bias are equally as lethal because each stems from racist stereotypes so deeply ingrained within our subconscious that they result in racially biased behavior toward other people. I say to you, racism is not an inherent human quality. Racism is an inherited social condition. Children are not born to hate, and they do not hate until we teach them to hate. To speak of racism is to compare racism and its development to the growth of a root system beneath a mighty oak. Racism has many roots, and like a tree, they run deep and wide. And the deeper they go, the wider and the stronger and the more influential they spread. Allow me to explain how racism develops. Racism develops in four levels, in four forms. The first level of racism is personal. It begins with individual beliefs which are shared through families when we're young. The second level of racism is not personal, but interpersonal. It is shared through the social values of our friends, our neighbors, and our associates. The third level of racism, beyond personal and interpersonal, is institutional. These values are shared through organizational actions, namely our professional associates and co-workers and others. The fourth and final and the most lethal level of racism, beyond personal, interpersonal, institutional, is societal. Societal racism is spread through the philosophical worldview that culture teaches members of certain sects to believe that they are supremely superior to all other people. Racism can exist both implicitly as discrimination and unconscious as bias. Implicit racism is fully visible. We see it in legislation, laws, signs, and the other visible ciphers of racism: white only, black only. Unconscious bias, however, is not visible. It exists as the unseen force in our minds, which extends the growth and spread of racism both far and wide. There was a time when implicit racism ran rampant, but since it has been challenged, it has been checked. Unconscious bias, however, still exists. It exists behind the closed doors in our private homes. It exists in our family circles, in our friendship gatherings, in exclusive clubs, in corporate boardrooms, in professional conferences, and yes, even in our social groups. For the sake of our common good and for the concern of our children's well-being, as well as for the sake of every community's future growth and prosperity, let us rise above racism, visible and invisible. Let us rise and become non-racist. But let us not stop there. Let us become anti-racist. How do we become anti-racist? In order to become an anti-racist people, we must become a race-recognizing people. When I say race-recognizing, I challenge us again to do a bit of thinking. Think about what we mean when we say, I don't see color. But yet we know that everywhere we look, we see color all around us. Think yet again, I don't see color. But the same person will admit to seeing whatever color they're willing to accept. They fawn over blonde hair and blue eyes and white skin, which are colors. But when it comes to people other than those, they suddenly become colorblind and don't see color. I remember James Baldwin once said, not everything we face in life can be changed, but nothing will ever change until we face it. Let us stop pretending not to see the color of each other. The denial of color is too closely related to the denial of people of color for it to become a beneficial ally in the fight against racism. It is understandable, though, why so many white persons of good intent, non-racist brothers and sisters, will resort to the defense, I don't see color, as a way to express their own lack of racism. But I say this to you, your noble attempt will not mask the ignoble fact that in this America, a person's color is the first thing that we are always taught to see. On that subject, I say this to you who don't see color. When color is a problem, the denial of color does not solve the problem. It only removes you from taking part in helping to find a real solution to that problem. Let us stop denying that we don't see racism, or that racism does not exist, or we did not know that racism was real. As a person of color, I assure you that racism is real. Racism is here to stay. Racism has always been here, and racism will always be here unless we do what the murder of George Floyd and the onset of COVID-19 did. They caused us to look squarely in the face of racism and call it what it is, a demonic, dehumanizing, degrading, and deadly social disease. Beloveds, if we do not find a way to heal this pandemic racial divide that is so prevalent in our nation, we and future generations will continue to be haunted by the restless ghosts of our nation's troubled past. I remember reading one of Shakespeare's tragic plays. Hamlet was haunted by the restless spirit of his father's ghost, who urged him to avenge his murder. But Hamlet wrestled with the decision to get involved and right the wrong. He wanted to look the other way so he could keep enjoying the privileged perks of his princely life in the palace. So he said, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing in them. Hamlet becomes the epitome of every tormented soul that has become trapped between the specter of two irresistible imperatives. Do I speak up, or do I just whisper a silent soliloquy on the side? Do I act on conviction, or do I acquiesce to my own convenience? Do I run the risk of rejection, or do I keep enjoying the privileged perks of my privileged position? Today, many non-racists ponder the same predicament. to be or not to be. When we see racist disparities in America legislated against Blacks in every area of life, healthcare, education, economics, law enforcement, criminal justice, employment, housing, and on, what do we do? What do you do? Do you act with conviction or do you accept convention? Do you fight against injustice or do you submit yourself to defeat? Do you stand and end racism or do you just sit down and pass it off as our children's problem? For those who may consider racism to be too big a problem for us to resolve in our lifetime, I respectfully disagree. Well, I agree with M. Scott Peck, who wrote in his book, The Road Less Traveled. Problems are the cutting edge between our success and our failure. Problems call forth our courage and our wisdom. In fact, he said, they create courage and wisdom. And it is only because we have problems that we learn to grow both mentally and spiritually. I say when it comes to confronting racism, any one of us who is not presently a part of the solution is by default a part of the problem. I urge us to rethink how we're going to deal with racism and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that we may prove what is good, acceptable, right, and perfect according to the will of God. Finally, in closing, I shared this. Shakespeare once asked the rhetorical question, what's in a name? For a name of a rose by any other means would smell just as sweet. I ask us this, what does the name Monroe Union County mean? And would it smell just as sweet if our community was not named Union, but Disunion? Would it be just as sweet if our community was not named Union, but it was named Division and Exclusion? Whatever the name of our community has meant in the past and whatever it means here today, I promise you it can mean something far greater and far more to those in the future. If we resolve to unify our efforts and live up to the prophetic legacy of that name, Union County. Let us agree that now is time to get rid of racism, injustice, and inequity so that the future of Monroe and Union County will represent a place of progress rather than regress, a place of inclusion rather than rejection, a place of unity rather than division. We have the power to do that if we determine that we want our community, our city, and our county to become what it truly can and should be. We all have a stake in that wonderful word, union. Monroe Union County should become a place where the word community is no longer one word, but two words, our common unity. Monroe Union County can become the place where the impending geographic growth that is on the Beltway and knocking on our door positions us to take advantage of the economic expansion that is headed our way. Let it be a place that the name Union represents unity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and let us proudly practice and promote that cause. Monroe Union County can become a place so synonymous with the word unity that equal justice, equity, equality becomes a reality for each and every citizen within our border, our city, and our county, without regard to difference, deference, or preference. I began this by saying a line from Goethe's quote, "To act is easy, to think is hard," but that's only half of what he said. I end by sharing the rest of the quote. To act is easy, to think is hard, but the hardest thing in the world we can ever do is to act according to our thinking. Therefore, I urge each of us to think inclusively and act justly so that we can teach everyone the value and the richness of our God-given diversity and lead our community together and rise above racism and embrace the true meaning of our name, Monroe Union County. I have to end with a poem. James Russell Lowell, This Present Crisis. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth and falsehood for either the good or the evil side. Some great cause will force a great decision and offer each the bloom of light, and the choice you make will cast forever, some in darkness, although in light. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong will forever be on the throne. Yet the scaffold will sway the future, for behind the dim unknown standeth a God in the shadows, who will forever keep watch over his own. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. We're now in the discussion and Q&A portion. And any one of the panelists or participants can now speak.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Benita Sanders. Can you hear me, Sue?
Yes.
Okay. Quick question. How does racism affect education and employment based on what Dr. Samuels spoke about?
Dr. Sanders, allow me to say a word about education. We know Arnold Toynbee said that education is the ladder to success. I believe that the life of many people of every race and of every creed and culture and gender will bear testimony to the fact that education helps to contribute to success.
Mm-hmm.
It was Plato who said that an educated man is as superior to an uneducated man as a live man is to a dead man. So I believe that our future, everyone, is predicated on having access to equal and quality education. We are suffering not only in Monroe Union County, but nationwide. We are suffering from the recidivism of equal access in education.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been long since we finally integrated our public school system, to the extent that some of us on this Zoom call, who are in my generation and some younger, some older, many older, that are still alive today, went all the way until high school in segregated and inferior school systems. When our schools integrated, well after the civil rights movement and well after Brown versus Board in '54, we found that education allowed for racial progress on a broad scale. Many in those time between the 70s and the 80s were the first of their family to go to college, and their success is a testimony to the importance of education. One of the greatest threats to educational equality today is the increase in charter schools. Now, I don't want to say that everything is bad about charter schools. My firm has done work with charter schools and they have a lot to offer. But what we must be aware of is that many charter schools are leading the cutting edge of resegregating our communities when it comes to education. And so we have work to do when it comes to racism in education. And I think that that is not as much as I can say about that. I don't have the answer. I wish I did. But I do know one thing, and that is that without education, that racial progress for any people, white, Black, Latino, Asian, it doesn't matter. Without good education, you're not going to change the economic condition of you and your family.
Okay, well, thank you. What about as it relates to employment?
Well, Explain, help me, what's your question?
Like, how does racism affect employment? We already know that, well, back in the day, still do the affirmative action. And even now, moving forward in this new time, 2020, we're seeing, or I'm seeing, or have observed or heard people talk about racism on the job and still, are struggling with that on the job. So when we talk about all the things that you mentioned tonight in your speech or your discussion, I'm thinking about how it affects employment. Have you had any experience or anyone to talk to you or mention that to you?
Dr. Sanders, I have had a lot of experience in that area. My business partner, you may see her on the line, Jan, wave hi to everybody. They can see you. That's Jan Barton. You see her?
No.
You don't see her? Jan,
Oh,
there you go. You see her now. She's waving hi to you. Jan is my business partner, and she and I are equal partners in Insight Consulting. The form of consulting that we do is diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. We have consulted with businesses, industries, communities, organizations, Fortune 500 companies, both here in America and abroad. And I am well familiar with discrimination and exclusion in the workplace.
Okay.
It is a problem that is not going to be resolved without the visionary leadership of leaders and people in positions who understand, first of all, Dr. Sanders, the value of inclusion in the workplace. Now, here's the driving force. For all of our clients, what we do when we go in is we understand that this is not an evangelical thing. You're not going to get people to remove barriers for equal employment simply because they feel good about it.
Right.
It begins, Dr. Sanders and others, with helping people in positions of leadership to understand that there is a great business case to be made for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Namely because America is becoming, fastly so, a nation of minorities. By the year 2020, which is a mere brief span in human lifetime, America is not going to have a majority. There's going to be every race, white, Black, Latino, Asian, everybody's going to be a minority. And our success is going to be predicated on our ability to be able to make the workplace and the workforce look like the community in which we market and which we interact and provide goods and services. So it's not just that people need to start hiring people of color because people of color have been excluded. It's because people are going to understand that there is a dollar and cents initiative, a bottom line imperative, that the companies that are more diverse are going to be more successful, not only now, but continually so, increasingly so in the future.
Well, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Sanders. My name's Emily McGinnis. I'm a principal at a charter school. And first of all, I want to thank both of you for your question and for your presentation. But I do think with the education and the employment, schools do have such a responsibility. And, my job as a principal, I feel like, is to, like you said, not to hire people of color just because we need to check a box, but because I want my kids at that school to have somebody that looks like them and to have somebody to look up to that, is going through what they have, been through. And I feel like a lot of times, especially with education, if you have white privileged teachers teaching all different races and sexual orientations, and then they only seem to get that viewpoint. And so my job as an educator is to open that and spread that viewpoint to be bigger than, like you said, that one race. And so as a charter school, I hear what you're saying because a lot of what you said makes sense. But I do feel like my role is to change that perception and to, you know, to show this community that we can be strong with all color, with all race, with all religion in Monroe. And, you know, the biggest thing that makes me so mad is when I hear y'all recruit Black athletes, you know, and I want to get rid of that stereotype because, you know, Black people are way more than an athlete. And so anyway, I just needed to share that I am from a charter school and I learn something every day. I'm learning myself about biases I may have had and didn't even realize it. So I want to thank you for coming and for opening my eyes as a white female in Union County, but for what you're doing for this team, I think is very important.
Yes.
Principal McGinnis, let me say a word to you. You don't know how refreshing it is to know that you're out there on the front lines with our children, all children, because it is a perspective like the one that you express that's going to change the situation in America. And I thank you for being in the field of education. I also know I started my career as the academic dean of a graduate university, so I'm familiar with education. Jan and I both come from education background. I have great respect for education. I only wish when I was in public school, I had a principal like you, Principal McGinnis.
If I may jump in, this is Oscar Gardine. First of all, I want to say thank you, Councilwoman Anthony and other council persons for making this happen. I think it's a good thing and probably a little bit long overdue. I secondly want to say thank you, Dr. Samuel, for an excellent presentation. You're going to have to give me those notes because I'm sure I can get some good ideas out of what you've shared and pass some great things along.
Glad to share.
But I want to kind of cut through the chase. I don't know how long this meeting is supposed to last, but according to my timepiece, it's 7:52. And my understanding is this discussion should zero in on the city of Monroe. This is where we live. Are certainly concerns as a citizens of this city. I kind of want to cut zero on that. You on the Confederate monument that we have in our city, and I am hopeful that something's going to be done about that. I applaud our local NAACP chapter for addressing our Board of County Commissioners a couple of weeks ago. I understand there's going to be a public hearing next month sometime, and I'm hopeful that we will rally behind the efforts of the NAACP to see that thing come down. And I'm being kind with my words because I am convinced what a swastika is to a Jew, that Confederate flag is to Black African Americans. And so I think something definitely needs to be done about that. But I want to jump into that part about systemic racism as relates to the workforce. I've been in Monroe, Union County now for 25 years. And very respectfully, I don't believe our city has done a very good job in providing jobs that would allow, if you will, the employment pool for the city to be representative of the citizens in our city. I requested some information from HR leader, Ms. Deborah Reed, and I'm thankful that she was able to get that to me. But it's a 2020 EEO workforce analysis as of August 13 of this year. And looking over this really stuck in my craw, and it offended me in so many ways. As I look at the jobs, everything from the highest level of administration to the very respectful to the lowest level, service maintenance. Service maintenance is the only area where we have a representation of our city population. Sad, absolutely sad. And I believe if Monroe is going to be sincere about not just talking about leveling, if you will, the playing field and giving equal opportunities to everyone, even in its employment pool, this is a great place to start because I'm convinced that there are African Americans who can do more than just work in service maintenance positions. But unless there is, in what I call a deliberate effort not to just hire people because they're Black. I think someone said that. But I know that there are qualified African Americans, some of whom I've spoken with, who tried to get on at the city of Monroe, and that did not happen. And so for me, I think you've kind of touched on a couple of things that I think the city of Monroe needs to take a hard, serious look at if they really want to address the issues of race in our city. And I think those are two good places where we could start. I'll be quiet because I think I can talk as much.
Let me say something, Mr. Gardine,
yes.
Mr. Gardine, is that I fully and squarely concur with the fact that one of the greatest barriers that is hindering, as you say, the leveling of the playing fields are the economic equity, removing the economic inequality among our communities is employment.
Certainly.
Most people are not aware that right now today, the wealth gap, as it is called, is of such that it takes 11.5 Black families to equal the wealth of one middle-class white family.
That's accurate.
I mean, families of equal wealth. You got someone who's a Black middle-class family and a white middle-class family because of an employment economic disparities. And it sounds almost tragic to be true, too tragic, but 11.5 Black families would have to be put together in order to equal one white family that is in the middle class. And the disparity gets worse when we get deeper into poverty. And a lot of it has to do with access. Some people will say, well, if Black people were to have more initiative, they would have more equality. Not so, because in America right now, and I'm sure it's the same in this area, the census has reported that the wealth gap between a Black and a white family of the same status is that for Blacks who have a household headed by a college degree holder, they make less than a household headed by a white person with a high school degree.
Yeah.
Now, that is absolutely not related to the lack of initiative. It has to do with the lack of opportunity.
Yes, and I believe there has to be a deliberate attempt on the part of our government and other places of employment to try to level that playing field. And I have not. Yeah.
Mr. Ardeen and Mr. Samuel, this is Matthew Belk. I just wanted to mention I have a company here in Monroe, and this is fantastic.
Matthew, I'm looking for
Thank
you.
you
Where
so
are
much.
you? Oh, there you are. I see you. I see you. I can't hear you, Matthew.
I think he froze.
Matthew,
I can see him, but I can't hear him.
Let me jump back in here in a second.
I don't know if anybody else can see it, but look like Mr. Belk is not on.
He's logging back in.
Okay.
Well, while he's logging back in, I have a question. Is the monument on the courthouse square, the Confederate monument on the courthouse square, is it racist?
That's a question for Dr. Samuel.
Is it? For anybody that want to answer it, my thing is it racist?
Well, let me say this to you, Michael. I think it's Michael Hall, right?
Right.
Is that the greatest philosopher on the creation of symbols is an Indian scholar named Macriya Eliade, and he wrote the book on symbols. the definitive Bible on symbols. And what Eliade says is that a symbol in itself is meaningless. But the value that we impute to that symbol carries well beyond the actual symbol, quote, statue itself. I don't think a statue is racist. I think it's just a piece of stone. But I think what is racist is what it means and what it reflects and what we impute into that statue. The wordings of it, if you look at it, they're basically memorial, but you got to know what they are memorializing. Right. And that's where the racism, you cannot memorialize. You know, someone said this, everybody has a right to their opinion, up to the point that your opinion denies me the equal right that you have to coexist. When we look at memorials and symbols and statues, no one can argue that the sentiment imputed into that piece of granite or whatever it is, marble, is fundamentally built on the fact that Black people do not have the equal right to exist as white people. That, my friend would say, is racist. I think that if people want to have monuments and memorials of sort, this is America. Everybody should be free to do that. The problem is when you force other people who are demeaned by it and damaged by it psychologically to pay for it and put it on public land. I think that's where the boundaries have been pushed too far.
I would have to agree with that because that is my problem with it, that it sits on public land.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, I mean, we're all taxpayers. And your rights shouldn't, my rights shouldn't step over your rights, or your rights shouldn't step over mine, because we're both paying taxes. And
what we have to realize about those things is that when these statues were put up, namely, it happened in two historical clusters.
Right.
These statues were not put up at the end of the Civil War in 1865 or 1875 or 85 and 95.
Right.
These statues were almost exclusively put up during the pinnacle of Jim Crow in 1900 to 1910.
Right.
Then they went dormant. And again, after the Civil Rights passage, anyone who studies them will see, immediately after 1965, when the Civil Rights Law passed, we had another resurgence in the commission and the erection of these statues. So therefore, history shows that the sentiment behind these statues was more than just heritage or history. It was, I don't want to say it was a dog whistle, it was a foghorn.
Yeah.
People of color that says, yeah, slavery may have ended, but you're still not free. And if you're free, you're not equal, and you're never gonna be.
Right. I agree.
I think we move beyond that. I think that America has reached a coming of age to where we realize that if we don't have statues to William Lloyd Garrison, who opposed slavery, if we don't have statues to John Brown, who fought against slavery, or Denmark Vesey, or Nat Turner, who led the slave rebellion, none of those people have statues. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen a statue to Abraham Lincoln other than up there in Washington. But why is it that there are statues all over the place to these Confederate generals and soldiers? It's not because they represented the verities of equality and democracy that this nation stands for. It's because there is another subcultural sentiment that is being promoted in public places.
Yeah. If I can interject just a minute, we're going to run to 8:30, so we have 26 more minutes. Thank you.
Saluda, if I wanted to just address what Dr. Sanders had asked about in the racism in the business place, because we're in Union County, we have a software business, and I'm from Union County. Integrating our leadership has been difficult, not because of not having qualified Black candidates, but just because you end up hiring people that you know, that you're hanging around. And then when COVID hit, we went from 90 employees to 130. We started having a large portion of our company be in Michigan, Arizona, Utah, Oklahoma City, and suddenly this wasn't a problem. We suddenly started becoming very integrated company very quickly because we weren't against it. It just didn't happen even when we were trying to do it. And what I've come away with this is that while here in my hometown, I am not hanging around with people of color. This is not the business owners here. We've had our, you have your cliques, you have your things from when you're young, and we have to find ways of breaking those up, of more opportunities for just to be around each other. We don't do it on Sunday. We don't do it during church. So it's like, when can we get this put together? Because and this has been fantastic. COVID, and it's horrible, but it's been fantastic about being able to reach out to people like this on Zoom. This meeting is a lot easier because we're all doing it from everywhere we are. But I just want to take advantage of that right now. And I want to say, if we're talking about changing Monroe and in Union County, then we need to find more ways to hang out and go after this. That wouldn't have worked a year ago, certainly wouldn't have worked 5 or 10 years ago, but could work now. And I just hope that we take advantage of that. So Dr. Sanders, I just want to mention that in the workplace, this is a new opportunity that we have, different than it was before.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Let me say you bring up two things that I think are vital to helping people to overcome what you're speaking of. And one is the lack of contact on one hand and the fact of contact on the other. I believe that there are more people among us who are not racist and bigots to the extent that they want to do harm to other people. But I think it is an inherent human quality that we tend to lean toward people that we are more familiar with and more comfortable with. Therefore, I laud you for this kind of a forum, which allows us at first to begin to share ideas, to talk, to be able to bridge the racial divide in this county. I look at the screen in front of me, and it looks like the United Nations. I really love what I see. It's beautiful. I hope you all can see what I see. I don't know if you can see each other, but it's beautiful. And I applaud you for it.
Dr. Samuel, this is Kathy Bragg, and I operate Monroe, Union County's homeless shelter. We have a feeding program and we have a rehousing program. And to some of what Matthew was saying about opportunities for us to share social capital with each other, I think it still comes back to the many, many years of disparities that Black folks have had in regard to wealth, income, education, employment opportunities. All this impacts where you live, where your children go to school versus where my children go to school. And all of those things, I think, impact our opportunities to socialize with each other. If we really want to do something about this gap in wealth, we need to go back and look at what wages folks are actually living on. There is a disproportionate number of Black folks in our community who are extremely housing cost burdened. They are spending 70-80% of their income on housing, and it just takes one financial crisis away. A lot of folks say that people don't make minimum wage anymore. They're making $12, $15, $20 an hour. That's not true for a large class of our population in Monroe. Folks, do you know it takes 88 hours of work at minimum wage to be able to afford an apartment that is $800 a month? And you'll be hard pressed to find an apartment that is safe and in a pretty decent state at $800 a month. So I think what we need to do as a community is actually work on this economic mobility model. We need a metrics to put in place where we're laser focused on what we can do to increase people's earning capacity, to increase employers. At my office, we know that we have to take a lead on this because we do this work. And we will not hire anyone unless at $10 an hour for part-time workers, and trying to hire folks that are full-time workers in the low 30s to begin in the entry wages. And it takes a lot of sacrifice to do that. And it also means you have to pay benefits for folks because there's extreme health disparities as well. So I think we really want to get back to all of the other issues that we're dealing with. It comes down to the living wage for people in our community.
Kathy, you do
Ms.
it,
Bragg,
Bob.
can I say something to her? That's a very, very deep statement you're making here. Most people, when they think about economic disparities, they begin from where we are now. And that's a very visible place. You look at it and you say, how did we get so far apart? What history doesn't teach, Principal McGinnis, are two things that most of us probably never heard of, and that's Field Order 15. I was never taught it, and the Emancipation Compensation Act of 1865, signed by Abraham Lincoln. Field Order 15 was started by Tecumseh Sherman. That's him, William Tecumseh Sherman. In the South, most people don't like that name, but he did something. In 1865, Sherman took the land that he had captured on these raids through the South, and he divided up the land to the slaves who had worked that land. It was called Field Order 15. He mandated that every slave who worked on a plantation, every family would get 40 acres. And then he would take an army mule and give them a mule. 40 acres and a mule, as we know it today, began as a legal act by General William Tecumseh Sherman called Field Order 15. Abraham Lincoln responded in Washington, something else we are not taught. Abraham Lincoln, the great liberator, passed a law. Now you got to hear this one. Every person who lost a servant, I'll call them, during the Civil War, this nation paid every person who was a slaveholder $300 per person for every African that they lost. However, the Africans that were held in slavery got nothing. And when Lincoln was killed and he was followed by Andrew Jackson summarily reversed Sherman's law and took back the land from the few people who had gotten the 40 acres and the mule. And so today, what you see, the Pew Foundation did a survey in 2016 that said that one of the reasons that Black Americans can never catch up and close the racial divide is because we started too far behind. Imagine this. Somebody enslaves you for 246 years with no pay. The government then says you're free, you get nothing. The person who held you gets $300 a piece, which in today's rate of inflation would amount to about $8,000 per person. That was a lot of money then, and it's a lot of money now. And so this disparity between those people who were deprived of wealth and those who were awarded for the deprivation of wealth has continued to spread. And I say this and I end on that. If you can inherit wealth, you can inherit debt. And the debt of slavery is still a debt that Martin Luther King says has been unpaid.
I want to interject just a minute. This is just so dynamic. Other people on other panelists, please take the opportunity if you have a question or a statement, because our time is drawing near. We got about 16 minutes, so don't forego this opportunity.
I'd
So
like
Dr.
to say something. Oh, I'm sorry.
Dr.
Hi,
Go ahead.
Brian Curie. I would like to say something about what you just talked about. And it seems like the entire relationship between the Black race and the white race has been one of exploitation. And even to this day, I live here in Monroe. I'm living in the inner city in central Monroe. And I can look out my door from 304 Charles Street, and nobody over here owns anything. Everybody over here is a renter. They can get put out any minute. They pay all this rent, and they have leaking roofs. They have uninsulated homes, and it's the dilapidated communities. So it's like you send the police to lock us up, and you extract money from us and make us pay all these fees and fines. You take money from us through our housing we're overcharged, and the conditions are the only alternative that we have. And it's like everybody's making money off of this population of people who are medicated and developmental limitations, and all types of adverse effects from being a living Black in America, as you might say. But it seems like the entire relationship that we have is, we can throw touchdowns, we can slam dunk basketballs, but once we get out of school, we don't have the same opportunities. We don't have the same, like was spoken about earlier, the connections at these jobs. Our families aren't employed there. So there's not this pipeline for us to succeed in Monroe sometimes. And it's just this reoccurring theme throughout the history of this nation where, the Black community is one that is subjugated to how do we extract dollars from them and minimize their growth and potential, give them the lowest wages possible. So we stay dependent. We stay having to ask for things. We have to come to our city council. We can call it discrimination or racism. But at the end of the day, it's 2020 and our community is still having to ask for things that should be common, things that should be understood, things that should be basic human rights. So, it's, how do you change the mindset that's so indoctrinated that people don't even know they're racist? They don't know that they're discriminatory. They don't believe that, it exists. They haven't enslaved anybody. They haven't harmed or hurt anybody. They're not calling people out of their names, but they are part of a system that continues to benefit from the terror, the trauma, the pain that our community has sustained and endured. And yet we don't get any leverage. We don't get any footing or grounding right here at our own homes, where we go to school with police officers that end up locking us up. So, it is what it is in that regard, but how do we have our leaders in our community, how do we have them come together with the conscious understanding of development? Because when I graduated from Monroe High in '92, we boasted a prolific Black community of scholars, to only have a few years later, Monroe Public Schools merged with Union County Public Schools. And this goes back to what was spoken about earlier about the school systems. And in my community, we believe that our city sold us out. And they had information about building cattle. They knew about Union Academy coming for their interest, while we were going to be subjugated to whoever Union County Public Schools would allow us to have. And that's why we have these 5 failing schools in the city, where we're having a conversation about growth and we're having a conversation about employment, where we're not even educating our children. So are we here to fill up the jail cells? Are we here to pay, people's property taxes so they can get bigger, nicer homes? What is the relationship with the Black community and the white community in Monroe? And how can we move forward with a better understanding and comprehension of one another, and what's necessary and what it's going to take for us to have equality in this community?
Ryan, I think that now for me, I can only speak existentially. I'm well familiar with poverty. I was born in a sharecropper's family, one step up from slavery. I lived in the ghetto. I understand the struggles. I believe that Black success and progress is twofold. I think that we as African Americans are going to have to come to terms with the number of people in our own communities who have become complacent with mediocrity. We have to inspire excellence from within. I don't think anybody's ever going to help us to overcome our condition, no matter how much they may want to, until we decide that we're going to live by the credo, good, better, best, never let it rest till your good is your better and your better is your best. We have to inspire our own selves to be able to do what we can. Now, do we have barriers? Do we have people who are going to throw stumbling blocks? Yes, always gonna be. That's a part of society. But I think that we have to start right where we control. And what we control is our own homes, teaching our children the importance of good education, teaching our children the importance of being able to be committed to getting themselves an education or a trade so that they can continue to contend for these jobs. We're going to have people like Mr. Belk, who's always going to say, hey, I want to hire people. I don't know people. We're going to have to find a way. The way I went from the fields in migrant communities to having my own business and working with national, international 500 companies is through education. I say to people like the principal that was online, I don't know where she is. When I was, there you go, Principal McGinnis. When I was in high school, I went to my guidance counselor as a senior, and I was in the academic acceleration program. And I was asked, what does my father do? And I said, he's a factory worker. And I was told by my advisor, then why do you want to go to college? No one in my family had ever. Why don't you just do what your father did? And the point is that we've got to somehow give our children the vision and the dream and the concept that they can excel. Now, that lady who told me basically that I was only good for the factory was talking to me, who would later on become an academic scholarship student, graduating first in my class at Duke University, and go on and get a full scholarship to Drew University in my doctorate, and graduated again first in my class. In Duke, I was one of 32 Black kids in a class of over 300. In Drew, I was the only Black person in my doctoral class out of a class of 20-something. But the key is that, Ryan, and maybe this is the key, my mother, who had a 10th grade education, ever since I can remember, she said something to me that still resonates with me. She says, to some people, you're nobody. But I want you to know, to me, God was creating somebody when he made you. And that stuck with me. And she always told me, you're as good as anybody else. We've got to start in our homes to help our children to overcome the mindset of nihilism that causes them to believe that they're not going to live beyond the age of 21, and to believe that they are not good for anything. But I got grandkids who are in high school and now in college. And guess what? I had to unteach them about saying, when I grow up, I want to be a ball player. I want to be a basketball player. That's what they were saying. My kids who grew up in the home where that's not our value, but yet that's what they saw. And that's what they dreamed of. And I said, no, you're not going to do that. You want to be somebody, and you're going to be something else.
Dr. Samuel, I think in the interest of time, we need to think about what are our next steps. You know, we've talked a lot about identifying the problem, but what are the solutions? And we haven't really had a lot of time to explore that.
Kathy Bragg. Ms. Bragg, I think one of the things that is needed, first of all, nothing happens without leadership. I think you need to get a leadership around this whole Union County Unification Committee, a group of people who are willing to do what Matthew said, who are willing to come together and allow themselves to teach each other about some of the things that I think Principal McGinnis said it, that we don't even know we have, and that is conscious and unconscious bias. I believe that the first step is to start holding sessions where we can come together and learn what racism and bias is and how it influences our lifestyles personally, professionally, and collectively as a community. Once we start to get a grasp on that, I think then we can start to develop ways in which we can make systemic changes. But it's got to start at the interpersonal level. It's got to start with, I'm not talking about diversity training. I mean DEI sensitivity, teaching us why it's important to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in the county. Not simply because, and Ryan makes a good point, because people are being hurt, but because by doing so, people can be helped. That's where I think the next step is to start learning about the business case of the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And this is Michelle King. I would like to expound on that, Dr. Samuel. You have touched on so many wonderful themes, and we each have a story to tell. And I think that when we're putting this together, as you said, Kathy, about how we're going to move from here, we still have a lot more talking to do about why we feel our experiences, why we are at this point. And I think Reverend Tate and I had a conversation a couple years ago about addressing that. The elephant has to get on the table, and we bite pieces off at a time. But what I want to hear, what I want to know beyond anything is that as it relates to our city, council, our government leaders, our churches, I want to know that we are committed to looking at our heart and doing what is the right thing, as Ryan said, because Ryan, I believe that, as Dr. Samuel said, yes, it's going to take a self-awareness in the home. It starts with the home, but it also takes a concerted, a collaborative effort. The Bible speaks of the church taking care of the poor, the homeless, the hungry, and we do that, but we've got to work together in collaboration with one another to fix the problems that Ryan has been talking about. Because if we do what Dr. Samuel says, and we take care of our homes, and we give the resources, and our city council and our leaders and our churches are working together, we can heal this land. But it's going to take all of us. So I want a commitment from our leadership and from our churches that we're going to do this together.
Okay, if I can interject a minute, I'm getting all kind of texts that we need another session, what's next, and we only got 2 minutes. So I will commit to go back to council and ask that we can have at least another session. Now I have to commend Dr. Samuels. Dr. Samuels did this for us as an in-kind gesture. And we're so grateful. It's been so dynamic, so provocative. You know, I learned things that I didn't know. I got a chance to understand some feelings that I had, and it is so important. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful section. And I hope everybody on here, everybody on the phone got something from it and want to do something positive with it. Dr. Samuels, would you consider doing another session? I wouldn't ask you to come back again as an in-kind.
Saluda, I would be more than honored to do so. I think anyone who has been privy to be a part of this exchange tonight feel that beyond any other remunerations that you want to be a part of this kind of a spirit. I told you, I'm impressed by just looking at the faces on the board, and I would love to continue to be a part of this going forward, because this is something I think significant that is about to happen in Union County, Monroe.
If I
Thank
may,
you.
Ms. Anthony, if I may ask one question of everyone. Moving into the future, the one thing that the young people in Monroe are gonna need is a county commissioner who represents the District of Monroe. We have taxation without representation. We do not have a voice to speak for us in the county commissioners' chambers. So moving forward, if you're going to try to help through our leadership, we have to have representation in the county commissioner's office for the District of Monroe.
On that note, Ryan, I just want you to know that the NAACP has taken that mantle, picked it up, and absolutely that needs to happen. And I do want you to know that there's conversation on our part to see what we can do to make that happen.
Thank you, Bishop.
So as we come to an end, let me thank all of the participants, those panelists, especially Dr. Samuels. And now the next thing is what now? What's next? And we're going to commit, to drive forward with this and to see what we can do to become a more inclusive city, anti-racist city. And I think with Dr. Samuel's help and the help of all of these people working together with a united purpose, that can happen. So thank you all very much and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We see you, Teresa.
Thank you.
I
Good night.
see you up there.